Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenqi Yu. In the lead up to the Chinese Communist Party's 20th Party Congress, we have a series of conversations with experts to help us understand China in the world. Today, we're pleased to have Ryan Haas, one of the most respected, fair, and balanced China policy thinkers in Washington, D.C. Ryan is a senior fellow at Brookings Institution, a former China director at the White House National Security Council from 2013 to 2017, and author of Stronger: Adapting America's China Strategy in an Age of Competitive Interdependence. Welcome, Ryan.
Wenqi, thank you for giving me an opportunity to be with you on this show.
Of course. Has the U.S. changed its policy toward Taiwan from strategic ambiguity to clarity? For the fourth time, President Biden said the U.S. will defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. However, each time, the White House walked back by saying the U.S. policy hasn't changed. It's quite confusing to people that the White House and the president are saying two different things. And it's not the Trump administration, so people expect certain discipline. What is your interpretation?
Well, Wenqi, my general view is that when the president says something four times, it's not a gaffe, it's a statement of conviction. It reflects his strong feelings and views of what is necessary. And we should take him at his word that this is what he means. He means that the United States should be prepared to intervene if there is a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. I've been struck by Beijing's reaction. It's been more muted than I think many people would expect. I think part of that has to do with the fact that President Biden's words really just validate their assumptions. They feel like President Biden is saying the quiet part out loud. Of course, they expect that the United States would intervene in the event of conflict. They have no alternative. They have to be prepared for that scenario. But to the final part of your question, Wenqi, I think it's really important. It troubles me that the president and his staff appear to be on different pages on this critical question. There are a few issues in the world where words matter more than Taiwan, and it's important that we get it right. And I worry that having the White House staff constantly walk back the president's statements suggests that the president and his team are not on the same page, but it also devalues the credibility of the spokespeople who make these statements. President Biden is saying something that he feels very deeply about. And so my hope is that going forward, we can focus more on the objective, which is upholding peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And that as circumstances change, of course, America will adapt to those shifting circumstances. But all of our efforts, all of our actions, all of our words will be guided by that underlying objective, which is to do what is necessary to uphold peace and stability.
So I'm actually curious, if you were still in the White House, this seems to be the reality now. It's very clear. So is there a need to still keep it this ambiguous, or we should just make it very clear?
Well, this is a question that many people outside of government are debating, this distinction between strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity. It's not a debate that I sense has much salience inside the administration. The Biden administration is very focused on doing what it feels is necessary to keep things stable and to protect America's interests and to strengthen its relationship with Taiwan. And the reality is that the only way that you could possibly have what is called strategic clarity would be to establish a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan. Otherwise, this will depend upon the words of each president. Our presidents rotate through every 4 or 8 years. And so short of that, there really isn't a lot of value in sort of prejudging or predetermining how the United States would respond to a future hypothetical scenario.
Yeah, so in my own observation, my feeling is that the U.S. policy hasn't really caught up with the political reality, or I should say, just really the commonly shared view. But that's another topic we can talk about at a later time. Your book argues that competitive interdependence should be the new framework of discussion of the U.S.-China relations. Tell us, what do you mean?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk briefly about the book. The idea of competitive interdependence is intended as a framing device to help understand how two large, powerful, proud countries relate to each other in the world. It's not a formula for solving problems in the relationship, nor is it an effort to try to diminish the level of friction or tension that exists in this highly competitive relationship. But it is intended to try to highlight that there are various aspects of the relationship. Competition surely is a big part of the relationship. I think that's sort of the core of the relationship right now. But alongside that competition, there is a very deep, thick interdependence that exists. And if we only view the relationship through a narrow lens of competition, we will lose sight of some of the broader issues in the relationship that also need to be managed. So, for example, there are zero-sum issues like Taiwan, where there really isn't any space for compromise between America's priorities and China's preferences. But there also are a lot of zeros or positive sum or negative sum issues where each country will both either be affected positively or negatively based upon what happens. So public health, climate change would be examples of this. And having a policy that takes a more holistic, encompassing view of the overall relationship through a framework of competitive interdependence allows us to see both of these types of issues alongside each other. Ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to suggest, Wenqi, is that the purpose of government is not to compete with other countries. The purpose of government is to provide for the health, the safety, the prosperity of its people. And by being able to differentiate some of these issues and deal with them each on a case-by-case basis, hopefully we'll put ourselves in a better position to be able to deliver on that priority that government has for its people.
I think I want to dig deeper a little bit on this. I think especially when you were in the government, that was kind of a different dynamics between the two countries. And it was still possible to see areas for collaboration and areas where we, basically US and China just see, not eye to eye on those issues, including Taiwan, as you mentioned. But increasingly, it seems that both countries are trying to package issues together. So it's not like, for example, our special envoy, John Kerry, would say, we want to talk about climate change as, to collaborate. But China may say, well, we got to talk about other issues as well, because it's a relationship that's, overall, it needs to be more constructive. And there are other issues that stand in the way. Do you think that's realistic to have this kind of framework?
Well, I guess what I would say, Wenqi, is that here's the truth, the inescapable truth. The United States is not going anywhere. China is not going anywhere. Global challenges that confront both of us are not going anywhere either. We will be worse off if we're incapable of finding ways to coordinate our respective efforts to tackle these common challenges. The United States will suffer, China will suffer, the people of the world will suffer. And so it's not really out of goodwill or amity. It's really just sort of clear-eyed realism and identification of where our interest lies, that we have to find ways to disaggregate and differentiate these issues. I agree with your observation that from the Trump administration onwards until now, a lot of issues have sort of been packaged together into a messy ball where it's just become a big knot and nothing is possible. I think that's a reflection of where the overall relationship is. The relationship really is in a perilous state right now between the United States and China. We're not going to prevail over China. China is not going to impose its will on the United States. Ultimately, the United States and China are going to have to find ways to coexist amidst this intensifying competition. And they're going to have to find ways to deal with these problems that confront both of our countries if government is going to serve its purpose of protecting the safety, welfare, and prosperity of its people. And so it's not that I want things to be rosy and warm and happy between the United States and China. It's that I want the United States to be able to serve the interests of its people. And I think that having some semblance of functionality in the U.S.-China relationship is important for our ability to do that.
One of the things that you discuss in your book that I found fascinating and completely agree with is America needs to be more confident. I think in the past, we were able to see the separation between policy and politics, but increasingly it's hard to tell one from the other. And American anxiety with itself is really reflected in the foreign policy now, and most pronounced in its policy toward China. And I think that's what you're arguing in the book. Basically, the U.S. needs to know its own strengths, right? To build on those strengths. And I like the phrase you're using, which is China is not really 10 feet tall. But if you look at the U.S. domestic politics right now, American public is not necessarily convinced that Washington, D.C. can really lead effectively, not just on the world stage, but also to unite the nation. So that is a very worrying trend. And that, to me, is a much bigger problem that, Washington, D.C. may have to deal with before it can talk about foreign policy or policy toward China. What is your view?
Well, I very much agree with the sentiment of your question and statement. The reality is that no country can be stronger on the world stage than it is at home. And the foundation of strength is really sort of social cohesion and economic power. That is what funds our national labs, spurs our innovation, supports our military installations around the world, builds a social safety net that allows our people to grow, be healthy, and prosper. And so we have to start there. The most powerful thing the United States can do to compete with China, frankly, is to invest in itself and to find its friends abroad. And I think that we are making some progress. I know that, we live in the United States, and every day when you open the newspaper or watch the news, it looks messy. It feels jarring. But the truth is that our system of government has produced more wealth and generated more power on the world stage than any other system of government in the history of humanity. And we need to keep that in mind. For all of our warts and defects, there is something to the system that we have. And I think that, a predictable legal system that protects the rights of its people is a powerful magnet for the best and the brightest people from around the world to want to come live, work, and study in the United States. We need to nurture that. That is an asymmetric advantage for the United States. And it's also worth keeping in mind, amidst all the daily challenges that the United States confronts, that we have done some big important things in the last couple of years. We've come out of COVID in a way that provides a very powerful contrast to the experience that our friends in China are living every day. We've provided unprecedented investment in American infrastructure in the past 2 years. We've invested in an unprecedented way in accelerating clean energy development. We have implemented the CHIPS Act, which will bring back greater semiconductor production inside the United States. And we've also made progress with our allies, whether it's through the Quad grouping with Australia, India, and Japan, the AUKUS alliance with Australia and the United Kingdom, or the Trade and Technology Council between the United States and the European Union. So there is real momentum behind a lot of these efforts. I think the United States is actually in a stronger position today than it was 2 years ago to compete with China, and I hope that we continue to build on those steps going forward.
Absolutely agree with your analysis and commitment to making America stronger. Speaking of domestic politics shaping foreign policy, the U.S. Congress has always played a very significant role in U.S. policy toward Taiwan. We're seeing that in the Taiwan Policy Act that is currently under discussion. While it's watered down after last week's Foreign Relations Committee meeting, do you see more congressional support for Taiwan in the future? When I say more, it's not just arms sales, but more around symbolic support for Taiwan's sovereignty, be it name change from Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office to Taiwan Representative Office, or potentially Senate confirmation of American Institute in Taiwan's director appointment, etc.
Well, it's a really important question, and it's a timely question as well. My general sense to the first half of your question is that Congress traditionally has played a very large role on Taiwan issues, and I expect it will continue to do so. And I think that there are a couple of factors for this. One is that there is just simply strong, deep, passionate bipartisan support in Congress for Taiwan. That's a good thing, and I encourage it to continue. The other is that I think that there's a habit or a pattern in the U.S. Congress of focusing on issues that it feels the executive branch is under emphasizing. So, for example, when there are human rights issues in China and Congress feels like the executive branch, the president, is not putting enough focus on those issues, it will fill that void, fill that vacuum, and really put a lot of attention on those issues, as it did with issues in Xinjiang over the past couple of years. The same is true for Taiwan. I think that when Congress feels like the United States government, the executive branch, is not adequately focused on the threat or challenge that Taiwan faces, it will raise its voice and raise the amount of attention and emphasis on Taiwan issues. That is a pattern that has occurred historically, and I expect it will continue to do so. But I would just add one caveat, which is that, you know, the Constitution of the United States grants the authority to the executive branch to implement foreign policy. So while the Congress very well may pass laws, may pass the Taiwan Policy Act, if not in this Congress, then in future Congresses, or pieces of it along the way, it will fall to the executive branch to carry out those policies. And so it's just an encouragement for you know, continued focus both on what's happening on the White House side of Pennsylvania Avenue as well as the congressional side as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, while they may say our Congress could be obstructive, but I think, you know, on a lot of issues, this is more of just, you know, balance of power that's really built into the U.S. Constitution. You served in the White House National Security Council from 2013 to 17. And the world has changed a lot since then, to say the least. The U.S. policies toward China and separately toward Taiwan have also changed significantly, regardless of what the White House really says officially. And where is this headed, especially with China? I think that's the puzzle that the world really has. Where this is headed, and will there be an inflection point?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. There has been pretty significant changes in China and in the U.S.-China relationship in recent years. And as I sort of reflect back upon the past 5 to 6, 7 years, a few things really stand out to me. One is that China has just simply become more nakedly ambitious in pursuit of its ambitions than it was before. You know, no one is talking about...
Sorry, can I just ask on that? Do you think this is almost in some way pushed by the U.S.? Or do you think this has always been the case and this will happen regardless of other actors' behavior?
Well, I think that Chinese leaders for a long time have had a destination on the horizon that they've been aiming towards and wanting to build their national power towards. The manner and the timeline through which they pursue those objectives, I think, has been accelerated in recent years as a reflection of just, I think, President Xi's personality. He is impatient and in a hurry to deliver China to its goal of national rejuvenation. But so that's one, I think, shift that we've watched over the past period of time. The second is inside China. You know, China is just as an observable fact become more repressive domestically. The leadership has relied more on nationalism as a source of social cohesion than it did previously. And the state is playing a larger role in economic decisions than was the case previously. And we see this, you know, most acutely in places like Xinjiang and Hong Kong, but not exclusively those areas. I mean, it's something that transcends the entirety of the country. And then I think as a function of those first two observable changes, public attitudes in the United States towards China have grown much more negative than they were previously. There are far fewer voices willing to stand up and speak out in support of a more positive or balanced relationship with China than was the case earlier. And, you know, if we look at it from a sort of a more historic perspective, it feels like the United States-China relationship is sort of traveling down into this valley, this nadir, that is reflective of two previous naders in the U.S.-China relationship. One at the start of the People's Republic of China in the early 1950s with the Cold War as a backdrop, and then the Korean War as an exacerbating factor. And then the second was after Tiananmen Square, after the massacre in Tiananmen and the end of the Cold War. The U.S.-China relationship similarly had a very sharp descent during that period. Notably, in both of those previous instances, it took years for the U.S.-China relationship to climb out of the hole that it found itself in. I expect that there will be probably a similar time horizon for the United States and China to find their way out of the current descent that they are in right now.
Although I would say Tiananmen Square, it only took 2 years, really, because I think at that time, the US really wanted China to be more integrated into the world. So I think since then, what we've been seeing is the US trying to get China into the world system. And then really all the way up until, the 2015, 16 or 17, around that time. Of course, that also is related to China's growing influence and just power. And other actors and countries do play a role. It's not just sort of the US-China relationship when it comes to China's rising influence. And we just saw the news this morning that Germany and France will send their leaders to visit Beijing separately in November. And despite sort of the groupings of democracy versus autocracy that the US is really trying to frame on the world stage, the truth is that I do think China, especially its economic power, is so prominent that other countries just realistically have to work with China. So do you think it is getting harder for the US to sort of have its Western allies to be fully aligned with the US sort of rhetoric towards China?
Well, Wenqi, I think that if the United States sets it as its baseline or expectation that countries will adopt a framing of democracies versus autocracies, or accept a premise that there is a great power competition that defines international relations today, we are setting ourselves up for a certain degree of disappointment. Because the reality is that that's what the relationship looks like when you sit in Washington or in the United States, not necessarily in Brussels or Paris or Berlin or Tokyo or Singapore or anywhere else. So we need to understand that each country has its own interests, its own concerns about Chinese behavior, and they don't all map identically with our own. But that doesn't mean that we can just sort of put our hands up in resignation. Rather, we have to find areas where we have overlapping interests with our partners and be as sort of creative and ambitious as we can in identifying where those opportunities are, and then aligning our efforts around those issues, as well as our messages to the Chinese on those issues. And I think if you use that as the starting point, you can actually develop a pretty ambitious agenda pretty quickly around issues like public health, clean energy technology, climate change, trade and investment, and also technology innovation. And we're seeing a lot of work being done in each of those areas with various groupings of partners, whether it's the Quad 4 in East Asia, the Trade and Technology Council across the Atlantic. And so that's where I think it is most profitable for the United States to focus its efforts, not expecting that other countries will separate themselves from China. Of course they won't. But that as they engage China, that they do so with clarity of purpose around what it is that we're trying to encourage China to do or not to do, as it may be.
Well, we've talked a lot about the US. I think the last question has to go to China. Tell us what you think is the significance of the upcoming 20th Party Congress and China's current challenges. Where is China headed?
Well, that's a big question, but I think that the Party Congress in mid-October will select China's leaders, obviously, for the next 5 years. The wide expectation is that President Xi will stay at the top, but the question mark is who will join him at the pinnacle of power at the top of the Chinese Communist Party. And that remains a question mark. And I think that a lot of people will look at the selection of Politburo Standing Committee members to get a sense of how much influence or dominance President Xi has over.
And what is your prediction, if you can share?
Well, my expectation is that President Xi will probably get a lot of what he wants. I think that he has established a pretty high degree of influence over decisions. And I think that he's spent the last 10 years erasing any challenges to his authority. And so I think that it will be broadly reflective of his preferences. The big question that I have, though, and I think many others have, is will there be course corrections after the Party Congress in China's domestic and external policies? Because it's pretty broadly understood that China's not on a great track right now. Their COVID lockdowns are highly disruptive. Their debt and demographics are worsening. Their economy is decelerating. Their relations with every developed country simultaneously are worsening right now. This is not a report card of success, in other words, but it's not clear whether or not China is capable of doing what it's done in the past of course correcting and adjusting based upon the feedback it's receiving, or if China is just locked on a course that will stay constant as long as President Xi remains in power. So that's the big question mark that I think a lot of observers have, and will be trying to use the Party Congress and its aftermath to begin to measure.
I think we will know next month and the months beyond to see where is really China going to look like and the general direction. But thank you so much, Ryan, today for sharing with us your thinking in terms of the new framework of the most consequential relationship in the 21st century through the framework of competitive interdependence. As always, thank you for your very balanced and fair view. Take care.
Thank you.
Great.